Oh, Mum, do I have to get a haircut? Darren asked his mother, Eileen Jones. But it's halfway down your back, Darren. Do you like being mistaken for a girl? I'll go next week, I promise. I'm just round Bill's. I won't be late. And with that, he was off on his bicycle to his best friend William Boyd's house a couple of streets away. This was the last weekend before the long summer holidays. His exams were done, so he knew that as long as she knew where he was, his mother didn't worry about his bedtime quite as much. She toothed to herself, then went to join her husband in their living room. "Do you think our son is gay, Jack?" she asked him. "I know his friend Bill is. Mrs. Boyd confided in me that he's admitted it, and they do spend most of their time together, and I've never heard Darren say anything about girls." "You don't suppose he'd tell you about snogging some local lass, do you?" his father told her with a laugh. "I think I'll have a word with Wendy Boyd, see if she's seen anything that would make her think that they're closer than ordinary friends." And with that she closed their conversation, much to her husband's relief. Later that day she bumped into Mrs. Boyd in the supermarket. Inevitably the subject of Bill and Darren's friendship cropped up. "Do you know, Eileen, I was just coming to the opinion that there was something going on myself," Bill's mother confided. "My boy seems to always be talking about Darren even when they aren't actually together." "Actually, I've just remembered something. A couple of weeks back he remarked that Darren looks very feminine." Well, Darren often mentions Bill as well, but he point-blank denies that there's anything between them. Eileen Jones agreed. "My husband and I certainly have no prejudices, so I wouldn't mind if he's gay, and it seems so horrible that he feels he has to deny it." "Is Darren going to the dance next Saturday?" "I don't think so, Wendy. I only know they break up for the summer on Friday." "What dance is that?" "It's the school prom. Don't tell me he hasn't told you about it." "I know Bill wants to go. I happened to find out that his gay friends are going to all turn up with half of them dressed as girls. That way it won't look odd when they are dancing together. The school have given their go-ahead. Do you think you could persuade Darren to partner him?" "Well," Eileen suddenly came up with an idea. "If you can ask Bill to help as well, I'm sure we can get him to go. Suppose we don't tell him that it's the prom, get Bill to talk about a different fancy dress dance in town." When she got home, Mrs. Boyd was only too pleased to tell her son Bill that she'd found out that Darren was in fact gay, but he was too embarrassed to talk about the feelings he had. "There's no way he's going to admit it, even to you, or perhaps that's especially to you, son. His mother and I want to make it easier for him, but she needs your help." That was what started the hair running, so to speak. Over the space of several phone calls, the three conspirators worked out their campaign strategy. They told Darren that there was a big prize for the most convincing costume and that Bill and 3 of his friends wanted to go as the Spice Girls, but they needed a 5th person to go as Baby Spice, Emma Bunton. First of all, Darren refused point blank, and it took the combined pressure of both mothers and finally Bill pleading with him before he finally declared he was defeated and would be Emma. He should have smelled a rat when it was agreed that all the participants would surprise each other by not seeing their costumes before the night of the dance, but they also told him that there would be both a group and individual prizes, so in a way they would be competing against each other. His mother Eileen told him that if he didn't want to make a fool of himself, he should place his faith in her and let her help him. "You should spend the week getting prepared," she told him. "I'll show you how to act and importantly dance as a woman, then you should stand a good chance of winning the prize. I tell you what, I'll make an appointment for you to go to that makeover place in town. They'll do a really professional job for you. It will be my contribution towards you winning the big prize." The next day was Monday, and Eileen spent some time online, ordering all that he would need for the part: the Union Jack dress, underwear, and boots with 4-inch heels. Until the last item arrived, she had him practice walking in heels every night, using hers as fortunately they were the same size. He tried appealing to his father to put a stop to it, but he simply reminded him that once his mother wanted something she kept on until she got it. He even thought of getting his hair cut, but he liked it long and he decided it was a step too far once his mother ordered him not to. Mrs. Jones did hit a problem making his appointment at Good Time Girl Shop for his makeover. They were fully booked on Saturday, but told her that if he could come on the Friday afternoon, they would apply a long-lasting makeup at a discount. It would then still be as good as new the next day, indeed until Monday when he could return and have things undone if he wanted. As she knew that the school was packing up at lunchtime, she went ahead with that, booking him in for what they called their platinum service. She didn't make the second booking as she was sure he would enjoy being a girlfriend to Bill for as long as he could. She was a little taken back when they told her that it would include a procedure that would give him temporary breasts, but they would only last a week before starting to go down over the course of a month. They also said that they would tuck him in a very convincing way, but that would just need unsticking afterwards. They rattled off the various things they would do, but she explained that he was going to be free for several weeks before he needed to be back more or less as he was. With that information, they told her that they could make the effects last a little longer. By Thursday, Darren was exhausted by the punishing series of lessons given to him by his mother after school every evening. At least she was by then satisfied that while he wore a dress and makeup, he would easily pass as a girl. She had coached him in movements, mannerisms while wearing the very short dress, and how to get breathy control of his already fairly androgynous voice. In spite of his reluctance to take part at all, he worked hard and became proficient. Eileen Jones had said nothing to her son about his appointment for a makeover being a day early, which forced him to act his part for at least 2 days, not just one evening, until she picked him up to drive him there. "Now I don't want to hear any complaints about your makeover, Darren," she told him. "Remember that it's their job to make you into a really convincing woman for the competition, and everything can be changed back on Monday if you want." "I've got to look like a girl for a whole weekend?" he cried. "I'm not going to do it. Suppose that someone that knows me sees. I'll die of embarrassment. You will do it after all the money I've spent on you this week. I'm trying to make sure that you win the prize for the best costume, and the least you can do is cooperate." She had told this lie so many times she almost believed it herself, forgetting that all his school friends would not only see him, it would result in him coming out in front of them all. "Besides," she continued after realizing she had the answer, "I've put a bag in the back with a disguise for you to wear when you are done. It's so good I think I'll have trouble recognizing you." "What is it?" "A big sack to put over my head?" he asked sarcastically. "If you go in for the makeover with that attitude, I shall get very cross, Darren," he got as a very terse reply. He tried to make a bolt for it when he saw his destination. The shop front of Good Time Girl made no secret of the fact that its stock was mainly very sexy underclothes and costumes for girls. His mother held his elbow firmly in her grip and walked him into the girly emporium. He didn't start to relax until, greeted by a very good-looking blonde who called herself Sandy according to her badge, she took him through the back to a private room. "You look very nervous, Emma," she remarked. "Is this your first time?" "I'm terrified," he told her. "I'm only doing this for my mother. Nothing we do to you will be more permanent than a little thinning of your eyebrows, and they'll be back before you know it," she told him, wondering what sort of mother would put her boy through this. If it was true, the makeup we will use is called permanent, but it fades naturally after a few weeks and in any case can be removed with a special solvent. If you don't like the end product of how you look, we can make another appointment to get rid of it. "Did you just call me Emma?" he asked after he'd thought about what she had said. "Every man that comes here to girly up is given a femme name, that way you remain anonymous to everyone, and as I understand you are going to do as Emma Bunton, it seemed sensible to call you that in our records. If you prefer another name, I can easily alter them for you." "No, I suppose that's fine," he said as he started to undress down to his underpants the way he was instructed. The first thing Sandy did was to give him a body wax, which, as he didn't have a great deal of hair anywhere, excluding his pubes which she didn't touch, was neither too painful nor too protracted. Plucking of his eyebrows, though, was both physically and mentally difficult. It was only the friendly chat he was having with Sandy that got him through it, and the only reason that he accepted the drink from her that he knew was going to make him groggy for the alterations to be made to his body. He became extremely sleepy and the time seemed to fly by. He was only vaguely aware of things going on. He didn't think anything wrong as his scrotum was shaved and his balls manipulated up into his body. He was given an injection of something that made his penis shrink, then was hidden between what looked like labia lips, made from his empty scrotum. He completely dropped off to sleep while they gave him jabs of a compound that swelled his chest and 2 very feminine-looking breasts. Neither did he feel his ears being pierced in 2 places and fitted with gold studs. He hardly stirred as several women working gave him hair extensions, then dyed both them and his own a honey blonde color with pink streaks, and didn't wake properly until they were on the final stages of his makeup. There was no mirror in front of the workstation he was sat in, and they hurriedly fitted him with a very delicate bra with lace and embroidery. Then the look was completed with a pair of matching briefs. He was helped to stand before a mirror. At first he couldn't make out what was going on. A very attractive girl was stood in front of him dressed only in her underwear. When he realized that it was him, he nearly passed out. He was so shocked he couldn't speak. Sandy and two other girls helped him dress in the clothes his mother had packed. A pair of very fine pantyhose, a dark gray pencil skirt that was tight on him and only came down a short distance to his knees, a sheer blouse with vertical lace panels down the front for modesty, then a lightweight jacket. They placed a pair of court shoes with 3-inch heels on his feet and noted that he needed no help to cope with walking in them. Of course they assumed he was a regular closet dresser but hadn't been able to admit it, not knowing that his mother had been training him all week. He went to scratch his cheek and nearly took his eye out with long, talon-like nail extensions, painted a bright red like his lipstick and toenails. When he looked up after examining them, his mother was stood there with her mouth open. "Dar, Emma, you look gorgeous," shocking him. It was something he never wanted to hear. "I knew that you would pass, but this." His mother took his arm. "I've already paid, let's go round the mall together. I've always wanted a daughter to go shopping with." He got as far as the front of Good Time Girl, then realized what he was doing. "I can't go out looking like this," he told her, by now tears falling from his eyes. "Of course you can, Emma, no one will recognize you." She pulled him along with her and turned towards a group of people walking in the opposite direction. "If you don't look as if you're enjoying yourself, you'll attract exactly the attention that you don't want," she whispered in his ear. At least he could think clearly enough to realize that what she was telling him was true. With that realization, he allowed himself to be guided towards the mall that he knew so well before he realized it would probably also be inhabited by pupils from his school. "Mother, I can't go there," he stopped dead. "Many of my friends will be there and I won't let myself be seen by them. I don't care what you say." With a sigh, she reluctantly turned in the direction of where she had parked her car, thinking to herself that it wouldn't be long before he was out and proud. She could wait for her shopping spree with him, whatever he was dressed in. Arriving home, Emma made a dash for the door, pushing his way in past his father who had just opened it and running up the stairs 2 at a time to lock himself in his bedroom. "Was that our son that flashed past me?" asked Jack Jones of his wife, "or have you brought home a strange girl?" "That was him all right," she replied. "I think it's going to take a while before he admits enjoys being on Bill's arm." "Don't you think that he's going to be even more upset when he finds out the scheme that you and the Boyd family have cooked up?" he asked his wife. "I know it will be a shock, but once he realizes that we're supporting him, he'll realize that it's all for his own good and we're helping him." She was speaking quietly in case her new temporary daughter was listening, pulling him into their lounge to add to the security. "We've arranged that Bill and at least half dozen of his gay friends will meet up at his place so they can all go with him to the dance. Wendy Boyd is taking some and I'll take him and Bill, and more of them will go in a convoy of other cars to the school. He'll have plenty of support. We've told him that they are all going to change into their costumes at the Boyd's place so he won't think it odd that he doesn't travel there in costume, but I may need you to support me when he sees the dress he'll be wearing to meet Bill and supposedly change out of." That evening was the first time that his father started to worry about Emma. He refused point blank to come down for dinner, so he took a dish of cold cuts and salad with a Diet Cola drink up to him. Knowing that his son was embarrassed, he just called to him that he'd left something outside his bedroom door. When it came time to go to bed, the man was disappointed to see that although the boy had eaten a little, it really wasn't enough for a growing lad. Then when he used the bathroom, he realized that someone, and there could only be one person, had been sick. The smell lingered even after it had been conscientiously cleaned up. While upstairs, Jack heard his son's phone ring with its distinctive playing of "Only Me, Only You." He hesitated to eavesdrop but heard his son telling someone that he'd already promised someone else to keep them company at another venue so he wouldn't after all be going to the school prom. He then heard his son moving about so had to come away from his door. "Are you absolutely certain that you're doing the right thing by Darren?" he asked his wife as they got into bed. He's turned down taking someone else to the prom. I've had long conversations with Wendy Boyd and we're both absolutely convinced that Emma is made for Bill and vice versa, and I know for a fact that he's enjoying the clothes, even though he makes out he doesn't. It's just that Emma is terribly shy about coming out, but with a big support group around him we'll be able to see him through it. He needs to know that we love him and will help him through this most difficult stage of his life. All of Bill's friends are going to the dance with their partners and they've agreed with the headmaster that one of each pair go in a dress, that way it won't be obvious to the more prejudiced among the guests that men will be dancing with each other. It will be a big dance, 3 schools and the 6th form college are getting together to organize it, so a lot of people won't necessarily know each other. It means that very few people will really recognize Emma as being Darren, they'll just think that it's someone from another school. I thought the whole idea you had was for it to be his coming out. It will be up to him if he wants to say who he really is. I'm not totally insensitive, you know. While others slept the sleep of the just, Emma kept waking from a nightmare only to find that it was real. He couldn't get comfortable with breasts hanging on his chest, and he'd been in such a state that what he had eaten for dinner he brought up. He could only pray that Bill's and his friends' costumes were as bad as his, then at least he wouldn't be the object of ridicule. Nothing changed the next day. Emma stayed in his room but didn't attempt to eat any of the food left outside by his parents in spite of entreaties by his mother. In the late afternoon his mother told him, through his door, that she'd run a bath for him and he should get into it. It was only a very short while later that she heard the water run out and the bath being refilled. By the time she got outside the bathroom the door was locked. "Emma," she called, "are you bathing in the bubble bath I ran for you?" "No, mother," the boy replied. "It stank of perfume, so I poured myself one that didn't." "Come into my room when you're dried off. I've got the clothes for you to wear in there." She was disappointed by the bath regime but had a perfume spray to use for plan B. When he joined her he was horrified to see a strapless evening dress laid out on her bed, together with underclothes that would have sent him into raptures if he'd seen a girl wearing them. "I'm not wearing that just to go over to Bill's," he insisted. "I've only got to take it off to put my costume on when I get there." "Listen to me, my darling," his mother put her arm round his shoulder. "You know I've had you doing all that practice every night, well this is an extension of that. I want you in the right frame of mind from the start so that you will act and speak like a real Emma, and all this does is help you with that. I want you to put it on and think yourself into the head of a woman going out for the night. That way you'll act the part you are playing. No one will see you other than Mrs. Boyd, who will let us in, until we all set off for the venue. I've been assured that all the other boys will be in other bedrooms getting changed themselves." With a great deal of reluctance he took his mother's word for it and allowed her to help him dress once he had covered, only just, his almost invisible privates with a minuscule G-string panty. Then he shuddered when she unrolled stockings up his legs. "You like the feel of them, don't you, Emma?" she asked. "I could tell you did. I even told your father that you did." "Mother, I must admit that the feeling of these things isn't unpleasant, but isn't Dad upset that I like these girls' things?" "No, dear, he's entirely supportive of you, you don't need to worry. It's the prospect of anyone seeing me in them that makes me sick with worry. Oh my darling, by the end of tonight you'll get used to people throwing themselves at your feet." She hugged him, which would have made him feel good if it wasn't for the unnatural growths on his chest. When all was finished, his mother handed him a clear lip brush to make sure his lips stayed shiny all night and an evening bag with a handkerchief and other odds and ends to put it in. Even then she wouldn't let him see himself in a mirror, using the excuse that these were only clothes to travel into Bill's house. In fact, she was worried that he looked so much like a girl, yet could still be recognized if someone looked closely. She was worried that even at this late stage he might refuse to go. She took his hand and guided him downstairs past his confused father. "What have you two girls done with my son?" he commented with a big smile as they walked past him and out to his mother's car. "Good luck," he called out as the pair drove off. Within a couple of minutes Emma started to plead with his mother to allow him to back out. "Mother, please, I've never begged you for anything before, but I am now." Tears were forming in his eyes. "Please turn round and let's go home. I really don't want to do this. I'll be so humiliated, I just know it." She looked across at him and just for a moment felt sorry for him. If it hadn't been for all the preparations she'd made, she might have conceded, but her and her fellow conspirators had gone to so much trouble to ensure that everything went well, she couldn't. Don't be silly, darling. Think of all the people you'd let down. It will all work out, you'll see, she replied, reaching across to squeeze his hand. A few minutes later, they pulled up behind cars already in Bill's family drive. Eileen got out and came round to open his door, but when she took his hand, she noticed that he was shaking. She half pulled him out, and as they walked towards it, the door opened and Wendy Boyd welcomed them inside, showing them into their front room. "Emma, you look absolutely stunning," she told him. "Now I don't want you to be nervous, but we have a surprise for you." She had them both sit down on a large well-padded couch, pulled the door wide open, allowing a couple that he didn't know to come in. They were followed by another couple, but this time he immediately recognized a boy from his school. Then, looking carefully at the girl, realized that it was another boy in his class, but dressed as a girl. He quickly realized that both boys were well known as being gay boyfriends to each other. While he was thinking this over, two more couples entered, again one of the couples he recognized as being gay fellow pupils. In each case, it was either likely or obvious that the girl was actually a boy in drag. At that point, Bill came in wearing an evening suit complete with a tuxedo and presented Emma with a favor, a flower on a wristband, which he proceeded to pull over his hand. "What's going on?" Emma spoke in such a quiet voice only Bill and both their mothers could hear. "I'm afraid our mothers tricked you, Emma," Bill told him. "It was all an excuse so that you would be my partner at the dance tonight." "What dance, Bill?" He felt blood draining from his head. "The prom, of course, silly," Bill told him and took both Emma's hands in his. Bearing in mind he'd had nothing to eat since the previous lunch before they left school, Emma fainted. By the time he'd come round, he was alone with his mother. She told him that everyone else was getting in their cars. She helped him up, but because of the makeup couldn't see how deathly pale he was. "Come on, dear, once you get to the hall it will all seem right." She was moving him along. "Let's get you to the car." He was barely able to function as they got him into the back seat of his mother's car, next to Bill, who was alone and getting concerned about him. It wasn't a long drive to the school, where they followed 2 or 3 other cars containing Bill's friends to the drop-off point outside. Bill got out and came round to open the door for Emma, but the succession of events that followed shocked everyone. Still in a mental haze, Emma got unsteadily out of the car and saw the melee of students and others all round the entrance waiting to get in. Through them came a very attractive girl who Bill recognized as Jillian from their class. "Hello, Bill. Who's your partner?" she asked, surprised that an openly gay boy would bring a girl to the prom. "Oh, this is Emma. Emma, this is Jillian. She's in my class." He did the introduction so that Emma had a choice of outing himself or not. Unfortunately, Jillian was especially good on faces and wondered why she hadn't seen this very attractive girl before. She studied Emma's face. Something about it was familiar. Darren, is that you?" She looked horrified. "No wonder you didn't want to come to the dance with me." Emma was like a rabbit in the headlights. His world was collapsing around him. He did the only thing he thought he could do. He ran. He ran round his mother's car and straight out into the road and halted in front of an oncoming car. His horrified mother and the others could see that it wasn't an accident. He had run into the road and stopped, bent down, and was caught with the full force of the braking vehicle, which was traveling rather faster than the crowds of people around would be regarded as safe. He was thrown through the air and landed like a rag doll. People screamed, and one of the teachers, who was a qualified first aider, pushed his way through the gathering crowd and felt immediately for a pulse. He pushed a handkerchief against a gash in the boy's side to slow down the blood pumping out and called out for someone, "For God's sake, call an ambulance." As it happened, it was only a very few minutes before a first responder doctor was on the scene, quickly followed by an ambulance. They spent the next 20 minutes trying to stabilize the shattered body. After she'd been pushed out of the way, his mother and Bill's mother, Wendy, found themselves next to the girl who had introduced herself as Jillian. "I hope he's going to be all right, Mrs. Jones," the girl remarked to no one in particular. "You know my son?" Eileen asked her. "Yes," she replied. "I don't understand it. He's been trying to get me to go to the prom with him for weeks, and last night I finally thought I'd let him off the hook and told him I'd go with him." He sounded ever so odd, almost as if he was crying. Then he told me that you had arranged for him to go somewhere else tonight. I don't understand it. He's not gay. I know several girls that have been out with him, and I know he was dead keen on me. One of the other gay lads from their class was stood behind them listening. He felt he had to say something. I don't understand it either, he commented. I was certain he wasn't gay. Believe me, I know if someone is in. Darren was only interested in girls up to tonight. How come he ended up as Bill's date? By now Bill had come over to them, tears in his eyes. Just because he was my best friend didn't mean he was gay. He looked at the two mothers. He used to sometimes tell me that he'd told you he was coming to my place to cover that he was out with a girl. He knew you thought he was too young. You two have a lot to answer for. We can't be wrong. He was always talking about what you were both up to. He never mentioned girls to me, Eileen told him. Now you know why, Bill told her. I always really knew that he wasn't interested in me that way. Then you two convinced me that you knew better. Now look what you've caused. He's committed suicide rather than face the humiliation of being dressed as a girl for the sake of your egos. He only didn't mention girls that much to me because he knew I wouldn't be interested, but I knew he'd asked Jillian. Then you convinced me I was wrong. Now look what's happened. Bill was openly crying by this time, and Jillian grabbed him and held him tightly, even though she was crying by now as well. By now 3 police cars had arrived and the teacher came over to see his mother. Are you her mother? He asked. No. Yes. I mean, I am his mother. He's my boy dressed up. Well, whatever, you'd better go with him in the ambulance. He's very poorly. Do you have a phone? Warn his father to get to the hospital as quickly as he can safely. You'd better warn him that it doesn't look good. The teacher looked very serious, and the splattering of blood on his clothes didn't make it any better. I'll call him and arrange to get your car collected. Eileen, you go on, Wendy told her. Eileen was helped into the back of the ambulance where she nearly collapsed. Darren had tubes and wires coming out of him, and 2 paramedics were leaning over him making various adjustments. She heard a police officer telling the ambulance men that he would give them an escort. She had trouble not being thrown to the floor as the vehicle sped along with sirens of both it and the police car in front blaring. She couldn't understand how the medics could keep doing their job under the circumstances. When they got to the hospital, she was escorted into a private waiting room with tea and coffee makers, soft drinks, and various biscuits and sandwiches in plastic wrappers. She had been there only a few minutes when her husband Jack arrived. Oh Jack, I've done the most terrible thing, she sobbed. I know, Wendy told me. He spoke with a hard edge to his voice. You forced a perfectly normal, straight boy to act and be dressed as something he isn't. He didn't touch his wife. Instead he sat in an armchair, spurning the couch that would have held them both. Did he really try to kill himself? Eileen didn't answer. Her sobbing just got louder. After waiting for nearly 5 hours, a doctor arrived to explain their son's injuries to them. He suffered a broken arm, 2 ribs, his hip and femur, but what was most worrying to them was a fracture he suffered to his skull. They had set his broken bones but had put him into an induced coma to hopefully allow swelling of his brain to go down. They were more worried about that than anything else. But if all went well, he would be going for surgery in the morning to repair his hip, so long as no other complications appeared. The good news was that he had little, if any, internal bleeding, and there was no damage to his spine. There's nothing to be done if you remain here tonight, he told them, but if you would like to see him for a short while, I suggest you then go home and try to get some sleep. Nothing will change until at least tomorrow lunchtime, but should something unexpected happen, we would phone you immediately. They were shown to the intensive care unit where the doctor in charge explained that Darren was being monitored by a nurse on a 1-to-1 basis, and the various monitors were quite normal. She also warned them that his bruises had now had time to show more clearly, so he was not a pretty sight. She showed them to Darren's bed, where for a moment his mother's legs gave way. Her husband ignored her, so it was the doctor who showed surprising strength to stop her falling. Darren looked awful. His face was bruised and swollen so much one eye was just a slit. A ventilator was doing his breathing for him and tubes took care of his functions. A small one in the back of his good hand supplied saline solution for hydration, infused with the medications to keep him unconscious. His other arm and corresponding leg were in plaster casts. Reluctantly, they took their leave of him after giving him wishes that they could only hope that he could hear in his comatose state. Jack allowed his wife a lift home but wouldn't speak to her, and he went to bed in one of their spare bedrooms. They were both up and drinking coffee in their kitchen only a few hours later. At 8 o'clock, Eileen phoned the hospital, but there was no change, but he was being prepared for surgery. She worked through a few of the phone calls she had to make, letting inquirers know how he was, only important ones like her sister and father. While she was thus engaged, she heard her husband leave the house, taking his car back to the hospital, in spite of them saying there was no point. Her car had been driven back by Wendy Boyd's husband, so Eileen took the time to phone her with what news she had. It wasn't until 3 days later that they removed the classification of critical from Darren's prognosis and his ventilator was removed. A further day elapsed before he woke to find both his parents sitting by his bed, both looking exhausted with deep blue bags under their eyes. A nurse came over and gave him an ice lolly to suck. When he tried to talk, he realized why. "My darling, I'm so sorry, it was all my fault," were the first words his mother spoke. "I'm sorry, Darren, I should have stepped in and stopped things," added his father. "Why didn't you tell us that you'd asked Jillian to the prom?" "I thought you'd say I was too young," he croaked. The nurse returned to tell them that they shouldn't tire him too much, then went to fetch him another lolly as his throat was obviously very painful. She smiled at him and he smiled back, but some of the makeup on his face was still there, making him look even worse than he was. His parents were rectifying that though. Eileen had collected a solvent from the Good Time Girl shop and she'd been carrying out the long job of removing it, a little at a time. She'd been warned that it would need several treatments, each a day apart, to wipe it all off. His breasts, never as large as he felt they were, had already starting to go down, and the hospital had already unstuck him when they were looking for other signs of trauma. "You're not too young to have casual dates," his mother told him. "You're only too young to get very serious about somebody. At your age it would almost certainly end in tears, and we wanted to spare you that." His recovery went very well, quicker even than the doctors expected, and it wasn't long before he was well enough to be taken to a general ward. Because it was obvious to anyone who saw the accident that Darren had every intention of killing himself, it was felt by his doctors mandatory that he had sessions with a psychiatrist. She first visited him while he was still in hospital, taking him to a private room and introducing herself as Dr. Hillman, but insisted on him calling her Jenny. He had been dreading having to face all he had done to him again, but Jenny was so nice and gave the impression that she was almost contemporary even though she was nearly twice his age. It meant that he found himself telling her exactly how he felt about things. When it came to his mother's act of dressing him as a girl, he honestly explained to her that he felt there was something wrong with him because he actually found he enjoyed it. She went to great lengths to explain to him that there was no reason that he shouldn't indulge himself, and it was quite common for the men who liked to do that to still be heterosexual. "It's only in recent years that we've come to accept that instead of there just being male and female, there is just about every shade in between," she explained. "A very few remnants of prejudice remain, but from my experience, cross-dressers, what we call transvestites, can lead a full and satisfying life with a woman as a partner." He had several more sessions with Jenny, continuing after he was discharged from hospital, culminating in her report that set his parents' minds at rest. She was certain as she could be that he was now at peace with himself and could continue living at home without her assistance, but explained to him that it would be in his best interests to tell his parents honestly how he felt. As a result of his openness while he was still seeing Jenny, confessing to his parents what he thought of wearing the clothes, he was encouraged by them to use the clothes that his mother had bought for him. He began to accept his hobby, as Jenny called it, and after that so did his parents. Several times he went out with Jillian, who had been told the story of what had prevented him taking her to the prom. It was some weeks later, his physical and mental scars were healing well. They had been to the cinema and on the way home on a nearly empty bus, when she whispered in his ear, "Darren, do you think I'm a bit odd?" He was about to deny it when she continued, "I found that I keep thinking how sexy you were in that prom dress." She withdrew from him, and even in the poor light he could see that she was blushing. He made a decision quickly and whispered back, "Do you think I'm odd? I like doing it, just the dressing up, that is, not the rest with Bill and all." "Really?" He couldn't believe it. "Yes, Would you come out with me as if we're two girls? Then adding, that's come out in more senses than one. I don't know, the trouble is that the idea terrifies me. He was sorely tempted. Let me think about it, Jillian. Whatever faults Darren had, it wasn't doing something as significant as she was suggesting without consulting his parents. His mother, after making the stupid mistake previously, was this time thoughtful before she answered. Is it something you'd want to do, Darren? She asked. When he confirmed that it might be fun, she agreed to help him but laid down a condition. All right, if you're sure you want to do this, then for the first time at least I think it best if I come with you. I think that we ought to go on a shopping trip, 3 girls together. Would you like to ask Jillian if she would agree to that? Of course Jillian jumped at the chance, and the following day the 2 females helped with every detail so the Emma could make a return. Only once they were convinced that no one would recognize him as a boy did they set off for the large local shopping center. He became more and more nervous the closer they got to where he would have to get out of the car, so much so that both asked him if he was sure he wanted to go ahead. Having replied that he wanted to, they convinced him that the more shy he was, the more attention he would get. Jillian took his hand and she could feel him shaking as he walked alongside her, nearly bolting for it when he recognized some boys he recognized were at their school, but they passed by with only lecherous looks. By the time 10 minutes had passed and they were in a clothing store looking at their lingerie department, with no one taking any more notice of him than the other 2, he finally was able to relax. It was the start of a new life for Darren. His father finally forgave his mother in the same way as it was obvious that Darren had, making an altogether more relaxed atmosphere at home. True to his mother's word, Jillian and he drifted apart when they went to different universities, but contrary to what anyone would have thought, neither found someone else they could settle with. At the age of 24 they met up again at a school reunion. 18 months later they were married. Emma played a big part in their lives until children came along, although they only curtailed his hobby a little. They both thanked his mother for enriching their lives, even if it was by mistake, because it had allowed Darren and Jillian to both come out to each other.